There are bonds forged in the gentle, forgiving warmth of a summer sun. Then there are bonds hammered into existence upon the anvil of absolute ruin. When the abyss opens its jaws to swallow the other half of your soul, you do not simply stand at the precipice and weep. You dive into the dark. You become the anchor they cannot break. Chapter 5. The heavy scent of fading magic choked the stagnant air. It was the vital, escaping life force of an Alpha King, slipping rapidly away. Quigley stumbled on the uneven stone, swearing a breathless, terrified oath to the autumn court. Maelys pulled with everything she had left. The muscles in her shoulders screamed in bright, hot agony. Together they dragged Varric's colossal, unmoving frame across the threshold of the ancestral crypts. The imposing iron-wrought doors groaned shut behind them, sealing the trio in a suffocating, dust-filled tomb. He was dying. The void spear had vanished back into the shadows, but a terrifying ring of dark, consuming energy remained over his heart. The scent of his powerful aura, a dying, desperate storm of dark pine and crackling ozone, overwhelmed the dry scent of the ancient stone. Maelys collapsed onto her knees beside his towering form. Her own chest burned with a fierce phantom fire. The sole anchor tethered them without an ounce of mercy. Every shallow, strained breath he took dragged like heavy weights through her own lungs. Her vision blurred at the edges. She looked down at the fallen tyrant. Beneath the soot, the terrifying reputation, and the feral violence, he was simply the male who had thrown his life away to shield their child. He was her mate. The defensive, towering walls she had painstakingly maintained for 5 long years crumbled into fine ash. The lingering terror of his madness evaporated. It was replaced entirely by a devastating, consuming fire. She loved him. She had loved him since the very moment she sang his fractured mind back from the brink in the muddy borderlands. A simple magical tether was no longer enough. To anchor him now, to rip his soul back from the edge of the eternal dark, she needed a complete biological connection, a true mating bond. Maelys leaned over his still chest. Hot tears cut clean, pale lines through the ash on her cheeks. She did not hesitate. She did not tremble. She placed her palms flat against his chest, directly over the scorched thorn mark. She closed her eyes and called upon the deepest, most ancient reserves of her earth siren magic. She poured her pure life force directly into his fading heart. The ambient energy in the ancient tomb flared violently. Searing, impossible heat surged through their connected veins. Varric's spine arched off the stone floor. A guttural, inhuman gasp ripped from his throat, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. His crimson eyes snapped open. The feral, unhinged madness that had haunted his gaze for half a decade was entirely gone. The agonizing static in his skull was silenced. Only a raw, devastating clarity remained. He saw her tears. He felt the terrifying, trembling weakness in her slender limbs. With a sudden surge of unnatural, desperate strength, his calloused hand shot upward. His long fingers wrapped firmly around the nape of her neck, pulling her down against his broad, muscular chest. "My beautiful mate," Varric rasped. The sound vibrated deep within her bones, a primal vibrating purr of absolute devotion. "I am so sorry." His touch was a brand. The scorching heat of his skin melted away her despair. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her sweet amber scent, like a starving man offered a royal feast. "I will burn this world to ash," he growled against her jaw. His deep voice thrummed with lethal, uncompromising fury. "If they touch a single hair on your head or our daughters, I will tear the sky apart." He needed to seal the bond. He needed to heal them both before the shadow horde broke through the iron barrier. Varric tilted her head back, exposing the fragile, pale column of her throat. His gaze darkened with infinite hunger and absolute worship. He paused, a silent question in his glowing crimson eyes. Maelys answered by arching into his touch. She tangled her fingers into his dark hair, a silent, desperate plea for him to claim exactly what was his. His lips brushed her pulse point. Then, with a sharp, electric pinch, he claimed her. The sensation was a brilliant rush of heat that instantly dissolved into pure liquid euphoria. A blinding golden light erupted from their fused chests. It washed over the ancient stone walls, violently shattering the dark, parasitic magic of the soul anchor. The curse was permanently broken. In its place, the unbreakable, infinite strength of a true mate bond roared to life. Varric's chest knit together in a matter of seconds, leaving behind unblemished, powerful muscle. The crippling fatigue vanished from Maelys's limbs, replaced by the thrumming, limitless power of the earth itself. But before the golden light could fully fade into the shadows, the iron-reinforced doors of the crypt shuddered violently. A deafening boom echoed through the chamber. The ancient stone cracked. The heavy doors buckled inward. Quigley tumbled backward down the steps, his face completely drained of color. They broke through! The half-fae shrieked, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated terror. The Shadow Leader has fable. Chapter 6. The iron-wrought doors of the ancestral crypt did not merely open. They buckled outward in a deafening storm of splintered stone and twisted metal. Varric Thorn stepped into the dim corridor. The suffocating fog of madness that had chewed at his sanity for half a decade was completely eradicated. His mind was a diamond, sharp, flawless, terrifyingly clear. Beneath his ribs, the newly forged mate bond pulsed with a steady, golden rhythm. It flooded his veins with limitless, untainted power. He was no longer a fractured, sleepless tyrant holding his kingdom hostage through fear. He was the sovereign alpha of the Blackstone realm, operating at absolute, unmitigated capacity. And he was furious. Maelys stepped out of the swirling dust right beside him. The soot on her face was streaked with sweat, but her posture was entirely transformed. The cowering, silent cleaning girl who scrubbed tavern floors was dead. The woman standing beside the king was a queen, in every sense of the word. Down the hall, Huxley and a handful of surviving Blackstone guards were fighting a desperate battle. The black tide of shadow fiends was simply overwhelming them. Maelys did not hesitate. She did not shrink behind her mate's broad shoulders. She planted her boots on the stone, drew a deep breath into her miraculously healed lungs, and sang. It was not the devastating frequency of destruction she had unleashed in the dungeon. It was a siren's war anthem. The melody was a haunting, blood-pumping cadence. It bypassed the ears entirely and vibrated directly through the marrow of every wolf in the corridor. The sound wave washed over the exhausted guards. Instantly, their fatigue evaporated. Their irises glowed with an unnatural luminous gold as the ancient magic amplified their speed and brute strength tenfold. Varric turned his head. He looked down at his mate. There was no terror in his crimson gaze, only a raw, fanatic worship. She was magnificent. "Leave none alive," Varric commanded, his deep baritone layered perfectly over her hypnotic thrumming song. He lunged into the fray. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Moving with blinding, godlike velocity, the Alpha King became a scythe cutting through smoke. He shattered ethereal forms into drifting gray dust. Whenever a shadow attempted to flank him, Maelys's voice would hit a piercing, localized crescendo. The sound paralyzed the creature just long enough for Varric to banish it back to the void. They moved as a single, devastating organism. It was a perfect, lethal symphony of brute force and ancient magic. Within minutes, the corridor was a silent graveyard of dissolving ash. "The mountain," Maelys gasped. She cut her song abruptly short, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. She pointed toward the jagged peaks visible through the shattered fortress windows. "I can feel her terror. They are taking her to the caldera." Varric shifted instantly. His form blurred, expanding and altering in a fluid surge of ancient magic. The towering midnight black dire wolf reappeared, his thick coat gleaming with raw supernatural health. Maelys vaulted onto his broad back without needing to be asked, her fingers buried deep into his thick fur, anchoring herself against his scorching body heat. With a deafening roar that shook the remaining glass from the window panes, the dire wolf launched himself into the freezing night. The chase up jagged peak was a chaotic blur of biting wind and adrenaline. Varric ignored the treacherous, icy terrain. He scaled the vertical cliff faces using explosive muscle, driven relentlessly by the frantic scent of his daughter's amber and the foul, decaying stench of the Shadow Leader. They breached the summit. The air instantly turned blistering, painfully hot. The scent of boiling sulfur replaced the crisp, clean mountain pine. At the very edge of the volcanic crater, the Shadow Leader hovered. The towering behemoth of concentrated void held a twisting, sickening rope of dark magic in its clawed hand. At the end of that rope, dangling perilously over a churning lake of incandescent magma, was Fable. The 5-year-old was crying, her tiny hands gripping the magical tether in sheer desperation. Varric hit the scorched earth. He shifted back to his human form in a seamless, fluid motion. His muscles coiled to spring. Maelys stepped to his side, drawing a breath to sing. "I would not do that, Siren," the Shadow Leader hissed. Its voice was a sickening chorus of grinding stones and trapped souls. From the shifting shadows behind the crater, a dozen archers formed of dark magic materialized. Their spectral bows were drawn taut, but they were not aiming at the towering king. Every single arrow, pulsing with necrotic, soul-destroying energy, was aimed directly at the fragile line of Maelys's spine. The Shadow Leader let out a hollow, mocking laugh. It deliberately loosened its grip on the tether holding Fable. The child slipped downward, screaming as the blistering heat licked the soles of her boots. "The gate to the abyss requires a sacrifice of royal blood," the monster sneered. Its glowing eyes locked onto Varric with malicious glee. "Choose, Wolf King. Dive in and save your precious daughter from the fire, or shield your new mate from the venom aimed at her heart. You only have time for one." The monster opened its hand completely. The dark tether snapped. Fable plummeted toward the boiling lava. Simultaneously, the horrific twang of a dozen bowstrings echoed across the desolate peak. Chapter 7. Gravity claimed the child. Fable plummeted toward the churning, incandescent lake of magma. Her tiny scream was instantly swallowed by the roaring caldera. Simultaneously, the horrific twang of a dozen spectral bowstrings snapped across the summit. The arrows, forged of soul-draining shadow, tore through the blistering air. They were aimed directly at the fragile line of Maelys's spine. The Shadow Leader laughed. The sound resembled grinding tectonic plates. It had forced an impossible, agonizing choice upon the Alpha King. Save the bloodline, or save the mate. The monster severely underestimated the sovereign of the Blackstone realm. Varric Thorn did not choose. he conquered. My king. Huxley crested the jagged ridge. His colossal frame was battered, but completely unyielding. The executioner did not wait for an order. He hurled his silver greataxe with every ounce of his monstrous strength. Varric did not even turn his head. He reached out blindly. His calloused hand closed around the leather-wrapped haft of the spinning weapon mid-flight. Using the lethal momentum, the Alpha King pivoted. He launched the towering axe back across the crater with catastrophic, impossible force. The silver blade became a blinding, spinning vortex of localized wind. It intercepted the volley of shadow arrows mere inches from Maelys's back. The dark magic shattered into a harmless cloud of black ash. Without pausing for a single breath, Varric threw himself off the precipice. He dove headfirst into the blistering abyss. The suffocating heat immediately surrounded him, and the heavy scent of sulfur filled his lungs. He ignored the overwhelming elements. His crimson eyes remained locked entirely onto the tiny, falling figure of his daughter. He streamlined his imposing body, accelerating his descent until the wind roared in his ears. He collided with her midair. He wrapped his powerful arms around Fable, tucking her small head securely beneath his chin. He turned his own broad back to the rising liquid fire, ready to take the full force of the heat so she could live. Above them, Maelys did not cower. She did not scream in terror for her falling mate. The golden tether of their bond flooded her veins with absolute limitless power. She was no longer a broken, silent refugee. She was the Earth Siren. She was his queen. Maelys levitated inches off the scorched earth. Her amber eyes glowed with terrifying, primordial light. She opened her mouth and unleashed the siren's requiem. It was not a song. It was the physical, devastating manifestation of a mother's wrath. A sonic boom of pure crystalline kinetic energy violently ruptured the air. The sound wave hit the shadow leader with the force of a falling meteor. The behemoth of concentrated void did not even have time to shriek. The dark entity was violently erased from existence. Its ethereal body shattered into nothingness, leaving only the sharp scent of ozone. Down in the suffocating throat of the volcano, the magma surged upward. It radiated a lethal, blinding heat. Varric braced for the heavy impact, but the fatal blow never came. Safe against his broad chest, Fable opened her eyes. The terrified tears were gone, replaced by a luminous, swirling amber. The 5-year-old Earthweaver reached out one tiny, soot-stained hand toward the boiling destruction below them. "Sleep," the child whispered to the mountain. The ancient liquid fire violently obeyed. In a fraction of a second, the churning molten rock flash froze. The blinding orange heat instantly transformed into a smooth, solid net of cool, jet-black obsidian. Varric hit the newly formed stone. He rolled expertly, absorbing the heavy impact with his muscular shoulders. He kept his daughter entirely shielded from the blow. Absolute silence crashed over the caldera. The oppressive, lethal heat vanished. It was replaced by the crisp, freezing bite of the high-altitude wind. Varric lay on his back against the cool obsidian for a single heartbeat. He inhaled deeply. He could smell petrichor. He could smell his mate. Minutes later, a soot-stained hand gripped the jagged edge of the crater. Varric hauled himself over the precipice. His muscles burned with supreme exhaustion. His tunic was ruined, and his skin was covered in dark ash. Yet he had never looked more like a god. He held the sleeping child securely in the crook of his left arm. Fable's breathing was slow and even, completely untouched by the nightmare. Varric walked toward Maelys. The battlefield was a ruined wasteland of gray dust and shattered stone, but he saw nothing but her. He stopped directly in front of his mate, The terrifying sovereign Alpha King dropped to one knee in the ash. He bowed his head, his dark hair falling over his face, before slowly looking up. His crimson eyes burned with an obsessive, eternal, and terrifyingly gentle fire. "I let you slip away from me once," Varric rasped. His deep voice vibrated with absolute, uncompromising possession. "If you ever try to run from me again, little thief, I will chain you to my throne until the stars burn out." Chapter 8, 6 months. It was a trivial fraction of an immortal lifespan, yet it was entirely sufficient to unmake a monster and forge a true sovereign. The Blackstone fortress no longer smelled of stagnant blood and metallic terror. The ancient obsidian walls were draped in vibrant crimson banners that caught the afternoon light. Warmth radiated from the colossal stone hearths blazing in the great hall, permanently banishing the bitter chill of the mountain peak. The ambient magic of the entire realm thrummed with a steady, peaceful cadence. It mirrored the golden tether glowing within the Alpha King's chest. Maelys stood on the grand balcony. The crisp alpine wind tugged gently at the sweeping edges of her emerald silk gown. She was no longer a silent, trembling ghost haunting the bleak shadows of a tavern. She was the Luna of the realm. When she walked the echoing, torch-lit corridors, seasoned warriors stopped and bowed their heads. They did not do it in terror. They did it in unwavering, profound reverence. She was the earth siren who had given them back their king. A loud, chaotic clatter echoed from the sunlit courtyard below. Maelys leaned gracefully over the stone balustrade. Down on the polished cobblestones, Quigley was sprinting for his life. The half-fey smuggler clutched a purple velvet pouch desperately to his chest, his meticulously waxed mustache flapping in the wind. Close behind him, 3 elite royal guards were in hot pursuit. Their armor clanked loudly against the stone. "I swear on the sacred leaves of the Autumn Court, it works!" Quigley shrieked. He ducked violently to narrowly avoid a thrown training net. "It is authentic siren-blessed love tonic. Just 1 drop in her wine, I promise you." Maelys shook her head. A soft, melodic laugh escaped her lips. Her voice had fully returned. It was richer and far deeper than it had ever been. It carried the subtle, hypnotic resonance of the earth itself, a sound that could shatter mountains or coax a dying flower back to vibrant life. She turned away from the balcony and walked toward the royal chambers. The towering oak doors were already ajar. She leaned her shoulder against the carved stone doorframe, crossing her arms over her chest. She simply watched the domestic scene unfolding inside. Her heart ached with a profound, overwhelming tenderness that completely stole her breath. Huxley, the terrifying executioner of the realm, sat awkwardly on a delicate, cream-colored chaise lounge. His silver great axe was nowhere to be seen. Instead, his heavily scarred hands were gingerly maneuvering 2 wooden knitting needles. Beside him, little Fable sat cross-legged. The 5-year-old held a giant unraveling ball of neon-pink yarn. "Slip the stitch, then drop the loop," Fable instructed. Her glowing amber eyes were entirely focused on the giant warrior's clumsy fingers. "Slip, drop," Huxley grunted in agonizing concentration. A prominent bead of sweat formed on his forehead as he completed a miniature, entirely lopsided pink sleeve for a stuffed bear. But the true spectacle was the sovereign alpha of Blackstone. Varric Thorn sat on the edge of the sprawling, fur-lined mattress. The man who had once ripped abyssal demons apart with his bare hands was currently engaged in a battle of epic, frustrating proportions. He held a delicate silver comb in his right hand. In his left, he held 3 divided strands of his daughter's dark, curly hair. He glared at a small knot as if it were a venomous assassin. "It goes over the middle, then under the side," Maelys said softly, stepping fully into the sunlit room. Varric's head snapped up. The instant his crimson eyes locked onto her, they softened completely. The lethal, coiled apex predator melted into unguarded devotion. The scent of dark pine and crisp petrichor mingled in the warm air. It created a perfect, harmonious storm that settled deep into her marrow. He sighed in dramatic defeat, dropping the silver comb onto the velvet blanket. He scooped Fable up by the waist and pressed a lingering, affectionate kiss to her cheek. "I'd go find your banquet dress, little wolf," Varric rumbled, his tone endlessly gentle. "The Fey emissaries arrive in an hour, and your mother insists we look civilized." Fable giggled. It was a bright, chiming sound that chased away any lingering shadows in the room. She grabbed her pink yarn and darted out into the corridor. The giant beta instantly abandoned his knitting. Huxley bowed respectfully to Maelys before trailing obediently behind the little girl, appointed as her personal, indestructible shadow. The heavy oak doors clicked shut. Instantly, the atmospheric pressure in the bedroom shifted. The playful energy evaporated, replaced by a thick, magnetic pull. Varric moved. He crossed the expansive room with impossible blurring speed. He wrapped his powerful arms around Maelys's waist, lifting her effortlessly off the floor. She gasped softly as her feet left the stone. He carried her to the bed, pulling her securely onto his lap as he sat down on the edge of the mattress. She sank completely into his intense, radiating heat. It was her favorite place in the entire world. The unshakable security of his embrace was a potent drug. He buried his face in the sensitive crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply, pulling the sweet, intoxicating scent of crushed amber straight into his lungs. His warm lips brushed her rapid pulse point. It was a reverent touch that sent a violent shiver racing down her spine. Slowly, his calloused fingers traced the intricate lace neckline of her silk gown. He pushed the emerald fabric aside just enough to bare her pale collarbone. Right above her heart, the blackened, jagged thorn bush was entirely gone. In its place was a faint, silvery, shimmering scar. It pulsed with a soft, warm light that perfectly matched the identical mark upon his own broad chest. The phantom agony that had once tied them together in misery was erased. Now the mate bond simply hummed beneath their skin. It was an infinite river of liquid gold, connecting their heartbeats in flawless synchronization. Varric pressed his mouth directly against the faded silvery mark. He lingered there, treating the healed flesh with absolute worship. He looked up, his crimson eyes locked onto her amber ones. There was no residual madness in his gaze. There was no feral beast violently clawing to escape its cage. There was only a profound, earth-shattering peace. He reached up. His large, rough hand was incredibly gentle as he tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "Your voice once saved my soul from the dark, Maelys," Varric whispered. His deep, vibrating rumble settled heavily against her chest, an anchor stronger than any magic. "But you and our daughter are the only reason this soul wants to exist."